Good evening, colleagues and guests. I'm Bob Bernhardt, Chair of Learning for a Sustainable Future, and your host for this evening at the 6th Annual Dr. David V.J. Bell Memorial Lecture. As we start, I want to acknowledge that we are situated on the land that is originally known as Turtle Island and the Northern Territories of the Inuit. I'm speaking to you from the traditional territory of the Wendat, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Anishinaabe peoples, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Wherever we may stand on Turtle Island, we're reminded of the various Indigenous peoples and their unique nations that protected these lands for countless generations and that will continue to protect them from further generations to come. We acknowledge the land, the air, the plants, the waters, and the creatures with whom we make respectful connections and work together to sustain life for all. Now, Learning for a Sustainable Future is a Canadian charity founded in 1991 whose mission is to promote through education the knowledge, skills, values, perspective, and practices essential to a sustainable future. Working with business, government, school boards, universities, communities, educators, and youth across Canada, LSF acts as a connector, a resource, and a facilitator for change. LSF's innovative programs and strategic partnerships are helping reshape education policy and teaching practices to help students learn to address the increasingly difficult economic, social, and environmental challenges of the 21st century. LSF's programs focus on 4 priority areas: advancing policy through research, knowledge mobilization, and thought leadership; supporting teachers directly with professional development and resources; empowering youth through youth forums and student-led action projects; and supporting innovation through awards and the Sustainable Future Schools Initiative. Thank you for joining us for the Dr. David V.J. Bell Memorial Lecture. David joined the LSF board in 1995 and became chair of the board of directors in 2006. He was an integral part of our organization for over 22 years. His passion, commitment, and dedication to sustainability and education left a permanent imprint on policymakers, educators, and youth across Canada and internationally. This annual lecture is intended to continue David's legacy in helping bridge the gap between research and practice. This evening's topic is accelerating climate solutions. We have a very rich evening in store for you. We will have time for questions at the end of the presentations, but please post your questions in the chat during the presentation so that we can be best prepared to answer them at the end. Now, please join me in welcoming Jason Bell, David's son, to bring greetings on behalf of David's family. Jason, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks for that welcome and for mentioning my father's legacy and the commitment and connection that he's had with LSF in 22 years, as you say. It's a real pleasure to have these lectures reflect on that legacy and continue it. And I'm very excited for tonight's. I've been reading up on the work that John has done, and very excited to hear this lecture today. And I know he comes from a particular place, and it will be very interesting to hear the reflections of what's going on, and I like the sort of total approach that the organization, the Drawdown organization has for looking at all aspects of fighting climate. So I want to say thank you on behalf of my family to LSF for putting this together, and for John as our lecturer this evening, and Bob, thank you for hosting.
Thank you, Jason. We certainly miss your father and quite frankly, his leadership, his dedication, his caring, and simply his presence. He was a wonderful person to work with, and I thoroughly enjoyed my time with him. It's now time to ask the CEO of LSF, as well as Elaine Rubinoff, the sort of second in command, having a few titles. And the two of them have been with LSF for longer than David was. And I hate to acknowledge tonight that we're actually allowing them to retire. We tried several ways to stop it, but we were unsuccessful. So there will be other times to formally recognize their contribution. But as you can imagine, in a small organization that stretches across Canada, when you've had two people driving it for the length of time they have, the organization is them and they are the organization. Having said that, they've helped design a good transition process for us, so I'm confident LSF will have a very successful future. Pam, tell us about the current and how we're moving into that future.
Thanks, Bob. Good evening and welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight. So during this session, we're going to share the findings of LSF's third national survey on climate change, entitled From Awareness to Action, Canadians on Climate Change and Education. The report and the executive summary are on the LSF website. I encourage you to take a look at the very, very rich data. Presenting with me tonight are Jennifer Stevens, LSF's Director of Learning, Research and Programs, and LSF consultant, Dr. Karen Acton. As Bob mentioned, we'll have time for a few questions at the very end of the lecture. Please post them in the chat and we'll bring them forward at that time. So the survey was distributed and analyzed by Leger, and the project was undertaken with financial support of the Government of Canada. This 2025 survey compares data from 2019, 2022, and 2025, and highlights evolving perceptions, priorities, and opportunities to strengthen climate learning across schools. New questions explore public confidence in the education system, increasing student voice, identifying supports needed by teachers, and illustrating the growing concerns around mis- and disinformation. The survey provides a pan-Canadian snapshot of over 4,000 Canadians' views from across 4 respondent groups: the general public, parents of K through 12 CEGEP students, students 7 through 12 in CEGEP, and educators K through 12 in CEGEP. I'm now going to pass it over to Jen to share some of the survey highlights.
Thanks, Pam. So we'd like to start off tonight by sharing some of the good news from this year's survey results. Most Canadians acknowledge that climate change is happening and recognize people's failure to care for the planet. This significant awareness provides an important impetus for demanding stronger climate policies, greater institutional accountability, and increased support for education and community-based action. Almost 70% of the population currently believes that we are experiencing a climate emergency, and Canadians are overwhelmingly willing to change their life to reduce the effects of climate change. This has remained consistent since 2022 and is an inspiring and motivating takeaway from this survey to contrast the negative emotional toll and personal impacts that we'll see a little bit later on. There was an interesting contradiction that we noted in the data. Although more Canadians now in 2025 believe that they have personally experienced the effects of climate change since 2022, up to 44% from 36%, the number of Canadians who agree that the seriousness of climate change is exaggerated also increased in the past 3 years. This contradiction highlights the need for further research into the effects of misinformation, political polarization, and the role that emotions may play in shaping attitudes and behaviors. Negative emotions such as anxiety, frustration, and fear are the most dominant. While positive emotions like hope, motivation, and confidence are present, they are significantly overshadowed. When it comes to education, this highlights the urgent need for supportive environments where students can process their climate emotions and be empowered to take meaningful climate action. Fewer than 20% of Canadians believe the government is effectively addressing climate change, 19%, similar to 17% in 2022, reflecting widespread dissatisfaction with current policies and actions. However, the overwhelming majority recognize that systemic change is essential to tackling climate challenges. This disconnect between public expectations and political action is important. It tells us that people aren't disengaged, they're asking for more and expecting more. In every edition of this survey, we've included a short 10-question climate knowledge quiz as a baseline measure of Canadians' understanding of climate change. The percentages shown here reflect the pass rate, meaning respondents who answered at least 5 out of 10 questions correctly. Unfortunately, that pass rate has declined since 2022, returning to levels last seen in 2019. This drop clearly underscores the need for ongoing education for all Canadians and is a reminder that it is not a steady upward trajectory. Interestingly, while more Canadians say they feel informed about climate change, actual knowledge about its causes has gone down. One of the most common misconceptions is still that climate change is caused by a hole in the ozone layer rather than greenhouse gas emissions. Right now, only 47% of people correctly say it's caused by human activities. That's down from 54% just a few years ago. And only 50% know that carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases are the main drivers, which is also a drop from previous years. So even though people feel more informed, there's still a real gap in understanding. And this shows us just how important clear and accessible climate education is. When it comes to accessing climate change information, Canadians primarily trust what scientists and academics are saying, while few other sources see as much support. Several new questions were added to the survey to specifically address the ongoing threat and concerns about mis and disinformation that we've been seeing rise since 2022. The data suggests that many Canadians struggle to differentiate between real and false climate information, with only 17% expressing confidence in their ability to do so, suggesting that many Canadians feel ill-equipped to navigate conflicting information. At the same time, 79% agree that climate education should focus on critical thinking to counteract misinformation. If we want to build climate literacy in a lasting way, we need to go beyond facts, empowering people to ask better questions, think critically, and engage with information more thoughtfully. At this point, I'd like to pass it over to Dr. Karen Acton to guide us through a deeper dive into the climate education data.
Hi, everybody, and welcome. I'm Karen Acton, and I'm a research consultant for LSF, as well as an assistant professor at OISE at the University of Toronto. And at this point in the presentation, I'm going to walk you through some key survey findings on how Canadians in general, and then specifically how educators, feel about climate change education. There's a lot of surveys out there that ask for perspectives on climate change in general, but few focus on education, which is the gap that we're going to be addressing in our survey, because we know that education is an important mitigating factor to address climate change. And spoiler alert, there's a lot of room for improvement, but there's also some encouraging signs of progress. So let's begin with, how are Canadians grading our schools? Well, when asked how well schools are preparing students to understand and respond to climate change, only 4% of Canadians gave an A, and only 21% gave it a B. So nearly half gave it a C, and this, of course, suggests that many feel that schools are falling short in preparing students to understand and also to respond to climate change, and that climate change education is not yet being addressed with the depth or the consistency that is required. But despite these disappointing grades, there's strong public support for prioritizing climate education. So as you see here in 2025, 54% of Canadians said that schools should be doing a lot more. And 62% believe it should be a high priority overall. And importantly, over half think it's a responsibility that should be shared by all teachers, not just the typical science educators. Now, you'll see that all these percentages are down from 2022, which is a disappointing trend, and that Jen also noticed in some other questions in our 2025 survey. So the news shows this phenomenon of increasing apathy or disillusionment is actually happening globally. I'm not sure how many of you also did this, but this past afternoon, I attended the webinar by ReClimate. They were showing the highlights on a compilation of, I think it was 73 climate change survey results. They showed similar trends to those that we found in our survey on the decline of public prioritization of climate programs, and they also showed a dip in the concern about climate change in general. And some are blaming partisan motivated reasoning, that was the term they used, or inflation and economic concerns, as well as the well understood doom and gloom fatigue. But I liked their message of hope, and I'm going to echo it here, because even with the dip, the supermajority, that's a term they used, and I love it. The supermajority of Canadians remain supportive and on side. And that's what our data shows too. There's still strong support and ongoing support for strengthening climate change education and broadening its scope across the educational system. So there's encouraging news on the engagement front, because teachers are involving students in a broader range of climate-related activities than they were in 2022, such as eco projects, lifestyle changes, and even peaceful dissent and fundraising initiatives. In fact, engagement in political action and fundraising activities nearly doubled since 2022. However, while the good news is that the amount of time dedicated to climate education is indeed increasing, if you take a look, the actual numbers remain way too low. So it is heartening to see that fewer teachers are skipping the topic entirely, so 20% now versus 32% in 2022, but 51% of teachers spend less than 10 hours a year. So that's per term or per full year in K-8 education on climate change topics. And only 5% of teachers spend more than 20 hours a year. So climate change issues can be woven into all subjects and grades, yet out of the well over, 1,000 hours a year that elementary students spend in class, only 1% of that time is learning about one of the most important issues of our time. So it's clear, more needs to be done, because climate change still isn't a viable part of our curriculum yet. And this next slide might shed some light on what is holding teachers back. And a major factor is lack of support. Only 22% of teachers felt supported by their principal or their school board. And on the flip side, many teachers feel they don't have the support of parents. And this worry about parent support has actually increased since 2022. And it's good because more teachers say they now have the knowledge and skills to teach climate change in 2025 versus 2022, but still over half don't feel confident. And professional development is limited. Most teachers still report little to no formal training. But despite these challenges, there is hope. Out of the teachers who actually include climate change in their lessons, many are including the types of strategies that have been found to be essential in effective climate change education. So 60% encourage students to take action, and nearly half include solutions. And I think Dr. Foley would be happy to hear that, as Project Drawdown is all about solutions. And nearly half also teach critical media literacy. So some are even incorporating Indigenous knowledge and social justice themes. But again, this varies widely by region. For example, if you take a look at the provincial data there in the chart, Manitoba needs support to include solutions and action projects, while Saskatchewan is actually taking the lead in including Indigenous knowledge. So this is a really quick overview. We've thrown a lot of information at you on some of the highlights of the survey results. So the path forward, the important question remains, where do we go from here? So let's take a look at generally, what do Canadians want to see? They want climate education that's science-based, solutions and actions orientated, and emotionally supportive. They also want it to cover broader issues like the social, economic, and political impacts of climate change, and to include Indigenous perspectives and links to equity and justice. Specifically, teachers. Teachers are letting us know that they first and foremost need more time, and this is a significantly growing concern since 2022. Climate change education cannot be an add-on. It needs to be holistically integrated. It needs to be a lens through which subject matter is taught. Teachers are indeed asking for more. They're asking for more professional development, more resources, more strategies to learn and to identify and to address misinformation. And they want clearer curriculum support, including how Indigenous knowledge and Western science work together. They're also calling for a school-wide culture that values climate education, not just isolated efforts in individual classrooms. And finally, let's hear from the most important group, students. Only 9% of students say that climate change is discussed often in their classes. Most say it comes up sometimes or rarely. And provincial differences show that Quebec students indicate the least amount of discussion happening, especially when you compare them to BC and Alberta. So what students want is clear. They want more time spent on, again, solutions. They want more open discussions and more empowerment to take action. They want to feel like they can make a difference. I myself have commented about the lack of emphasis on sustainability in the curriculum, and I voiced my concern. And this is it. If our education systems don't step up, the question that young people will ask in the future won't be why adults did nothing to stop climate change. They're going to ask, why didn't anyone teach us about climate change in school so that we could learn to take on this challenge ourselves? So to wrap up, Canadians care about climate change education. They've said that loud and clear. Teachers are trying, but they need more support. And students, well, they're ready. They just need the opportunity. So the survey data urges all levels of the education system, from the ministry and board level to the school and the classroom levels, to take action in improving curriculum, in addition to allowing the flexibility to integrate climate change more freely by teachers, to expand professional development and to provide more resources and provide more support, to foster that school-wide culture of climate learning, and importantly, giving students the tools they need to think critically and act confidently. So we certainly have given you lots to think about. And when you've got the time to reflect further, I encourage everyone to decide what role you might play, individually or in collaboration with others, in your sphere of influence in advancing the path towards improving climate change education. And finally, for those of you that have questions or wish more details on the survey results, I'm going to reiterate what Pam said at the beginning. Please feel free to go to that LFS website and review the executive summary or the full report. And I'm now going to pass the baton back to Bob.
Thank you very much, Pam, Jen, and Karen. That was a presentation that was insightful, informative, and potentially and hopefully powerful at driving change in our education system. So very impressive. Again, please post your questions now if you have them. We'll do our best to get them at the end. It is now my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Jonathan Foley. Jonathan is the Executive Director of Project Drawdown, the world's leading resource for climate solutions. He's a world-renowned environmental scientist, sustainability expert, author, and public speaker whose work focuses on understanding our changing planet and increasing the adoption of the most promising solutions to sustain the climate, ecosystems, and natural resources we all depend on. Tonight, he will share his ideas for accelerating climate solutions. Dr. Foley.
Well, thank you, Bob, and thank you all for being here today. I sincerely appreciate your time and really very much enjoyed the conversation as well about learning about more about Canadian climate education. I'm reaching out to you today from Minnesota, which a lot of us hope could be the 11th new province of Canada someday. But in the meantime, we're going to talk about climate change a little bit more and maybe talk about some of the solutions. So I'll be presenting just a few slides talking about some of the things we could cover today. And then later, we'll have time for questions and answers. And I hope some great conversation towards the end. But for now, let me go ahead and share my screen here with you. Okay, great. So that seems to work. When it comes to climate change, this is a really, really difficult kind of topic to cover in some ways. But one way I like to think about it is thinking about it as like we're in a race, like every society before us. We're in a race between two very different futures that could unfold from this moment on into the next few decades. One future is pretty grim. It's a world that we literally undermine through our own actions, where we let climate change get out of control beyond where it is now to the kind of worst ends of the spectrum of possibilities. And where the impacts could grow out of control, harming vulnerable populations, harming our ecosystems and natural resources and our very civilization. That is a world we do not want, a world we don't want to go to, and one that thankfully we can still avoid. And I believe that this world, this other option for the future, is the one we all want. It's one where we end up stopping climate change. Not perfectly, not tomorrow, but we stop at least the worst aspects of climate change. And surprisingly, maybe to some people, as a result of stopping climate change, we end up building a better world than we've ever seen before. That's the great thing about stopping climate change. It doesn't just stop a problem, it actually gives us in return an incredibly beautiful, thriving world to live in. That's kind of great. Imagine going to the doctor and them telling you, hey, you've got this terrible illness and I've got a cure. That's not only going to, get rid of this illness, it's going to make your wallet fatter, it's going to make you 2 inches taller, it's going to make you more handsome, whatever. That's pretty good. And that's what we have here in the opportunity to stop climate change, the opportunity for a better world. And I believe, and I think you all do too, we can still win this race. It's not guaranteed. It's not going to happen by itself. But we can, if we are really determined and work incredibly hard, we can still win this race for a better future. But to do so, I think we need to focus on at least 3 big things, probably more. But there are 3 at least that we need to pay attention to. And I'd like to maybe share those with you tonight. First is science. Well, that's probably no surprise coming from a scientist. But science is a guide, and a very good one. And it's been helpful in many, many different ways. And even with climate change, science has already helped us. It's helped us identify the problem. If we didn't have good science, we wouldn't know why the planet was warming, why we're having more fires, more extreme weather events, more disasters. But we do know. We know because of good science. But just think about it. Greenhouse gases are invisible. They're an invisible gas. We can't actually see it. So our ordinary everyday experience could never have helped us figure out what the heck was going on. But scientists in the 19th century, not the 20th century, not the 21st, the 19th century, back in the 1850s, first figured out that putting more CO2 into the atmosphere would warm the planet. So science has already helped us. But now it needs to help us again because we have to focus on the solutions, not just the problems. And when it comes to solutions, there's no shortage of opinion and blowhards out there on social media very confidently telling you they have the solution. They have the silver bullet. They have the answer with a capital A. If you only follow them, you only vote for them, you only give them money or whatever, they will solve the problem. Well, unfortunately, that's not how the world works. Just shouting loudly and being confident doesn't mean you have the right answer. I wish more people would remember that some days. But getting the right answer means doing your homework. It means actually looking at the evidence. It means really looking hard and seeing what works and what doesn't. And that's where science can be helpful again. And science can tell us not only where to focus, but what tools we use when we focus on the right areas. So what has science told us so far about stopping climate change? Well, not surprisingly, the first thing it tells us is you've got to cut the bloody emissions. Cut the pollution at the source. That's jobs number 1, 2, and 3. Just stop polluting. That's pretty much most of the answer right there. Well, where does this pollution come from? As you know, climate change is caused by many different parts of the economy, but globally, there are about 6 big areas we've got to pay attention to. How we make electricity is one of them. Burning coal and natural gas produces carbon dioxide and leaks methane into the atmosphere, both of which warm the planet. Our food system internationally also is a big contributor to climate change, mainly through clearing rainforest, our belching cattle, our rice fields, our use of fertilizers, a whole bunch of things end up contributing greenhouse gases from food. We also have industry making stuff and disposing of stuff. Things like steel and concrete and glass and plastic and landfills and wastewater. All of that stuff ends up being about a quarter of the problem as well. Then we have transportation, getting around, cars, trucks, trains, planes, boats, you name it. That's about 15%. We have some more emissions from buildings above and beyond the emissions coming from the electricity going to buildings and the stuff they're made out of. Those are counted in the other sectors. But we have additional building emissions on top of that. And we have the processing of energy materials into more refined versions of energy, like tar sands going into useful petroleum products, turning raw crude oil into gasoline, things like that. That also releases greenhouse gases itself. We can also really kind of nerd out on this and look at all the details of all the different things we have to address when it comes to climate change. The bottom line here is that it's a multidimensional problem. It's not just going to be fixed with a solar panel, but we have electricity and food and stuff and transportation and buildings and how we even produce energy. All of those things will have to change pretty substantially to stop climate change. The good news is we know where the problems are, and I'll show you in a minute, we have a lot of the solutions already here. Another kind of trick to addressing climate change, but this is very much a secondary kind of solution, is to remove carbon. That's the idea of like removing pollution after we emit it into the atmosphere. That doesn't work quite as well. We can remove a little bit of carbon out of the air with trees, with soils, maybe even with machines, but they're very much secondary to stopping the pollution in the first place. Maybe the best metaphor for that is think of a bathtub in your home. If your bathtub is overflowing and pouring water over the edges, down on the floor, ruining the ceiling and the floor below you and destroying your house, what's the first thing you do? You turn off the tap. That's where you start. You turn off the problem at the source. Then later you get a sponge and a mop and try to clean up some of the pollution or stuff, water that's already there. Same thing with climate change. We've got to turn off the taps. No amount of sponges or mops are going to keep up with an overflowing bathtub if you don't turn off the taps. So cut the pollution is 95% of the job. Then later we can also remove a little bit of our historic carbon through trees and soils and machines, perhaps. Politicians love that, though. They want to distract one for the other. Sometimes they want to tell us, oh, don't worry, we'll keep burning fossil fuels, keep the taps open, and the trees will take care of it. The machines will take care of it. Not true. That doesn't work. So science tells us what is effective and what solutions actually will work. And that's what my organization, Project Drawdown, does. We're nonpartisan, we're non-commercial, we exist only to serve. We focus on the data, we tell the truth, we just present the facts. And we look really carefully at all the proposed solutions to climate change, whether they're in electricity or food and agriculture or a whole bunch of different sectors here. And it tells us that we have great solutions to climate change already here. We have about 100 of them that we believe are highly recommended, that make a lot of sense to use right now. They're available today. No more science fiction research is needed. They're all available now. We can do it today with about 100 solutions. None of them, no individual solutions big enough to do the whole job. There's no silver bullet, but there is silver buckshot. There's a whole bunch of little pieces, and if we add them together, we have enough to solve the problem. That's really good news. And science also tells us that we can afford it. That's another argument you hear sometimes about climate change is, oh, we couldn't afford to address this terrible problem. That's a lie. That's not true. In fact, we couldn't afford not to address this problem. In fact, even discounting the cost of climate change will have on society, even if we assume that that's zero, which is absurd. What if we just look on a level playing field what fossil fuels cost versus renewable energy, for example? Renewables are 99 times out of 100 cheaper than producing fossil fuels. They're just cheaper, they're better, and they're getting cheaper all the time. Same thing with electric vehicles, same thing with heat pumps, same thing with batteries. A lot of the climate solutions we're talking about now on this so-called cost curve, where we list climate solutions from the cheapest ones on the left to the most expensive ones on the right, 80% of our climate solutions we have now actually would make us money. They'd be cheaper than what we do in the world right now. That's incredible. So even if climate change didn't cause any damages, we'd still want to implement these solutions because they actually are cheaper, create more jobs, and would be good for the global economy. This is the biggest business opportunity in history. And as a bonus, it saves us from destroying our world. That's pretty good. So science has already helped us with the kind of what of climate solutions. What works, what's available, and what does it cost? Science can also help us figure out how to deploy these solutions, the when, the where, and under what conditions. The when is maybe the most important thing, and the when is now. If we cut emissions in this coming decade, we can prevent a lot of pollution from ever even going into the atmosphere by the middle of the century. We can cut emissions again the following decade and again after that, but the longer we wait, the less time these solutions have to work on the atmosphere and get things done. So just like in finance, we talk about the time value of money when it comes to investing, that early investments pay off in the long run. So that's why young people should save for retirement and you shouldn't wait till you're in your 60s. Same thing's true with climate solutions. We have a time value of carbon. Early investments today pay off in the long run. Don't wait to do your climate work. And when we think about climate solutions, I like to focus on what I call emergency brakes. These are the climate solutions that act especially quickly. Things related to methane emissions, for example, because methane packs all of its warming impacts into the first decade or two after it goes in the atmosphere. So if we attack methane, we get a disproportionately quick part of the climate problem solved. Same thing with deforestation because it releases all of its carbon at one time. So things like methane, deforestation, black carbon, and soot, these are emergency brakes that act more quickly. And it helps us buy time for the other solutions that take a little bit longer, like building out new energy infrastructure, new electric vehicle charging stations, replacing heat pumps, all that infrastructure work. Or nature-based solutions like replanting forest, building more soils, reestablishing peatlands. That takes a couple of decades for those natural systems to kind of kick in. And of course, new technologies are often very far in the future, and about 99% of them will fail. So we shouldn't be betting on them at all, and certainly not to arrive anytime soon. So we have to think about time when it comes to climate solutions. We also have to think about the geography of where we put these solutions, because the geography matters a lot. It turns out now scientists can actually pinpoint places for climate action using big data and machine learning and things like this. We can use satellites now, for example, to pinpoint a super pollution event. This is an oil refinery that released a whole bunch of methane pollution when they thought nobody was looking. But we were looking, and we were able to capture that event. It was never reported by the company, of course. These are underreported and usually not disclosed. And we can actually name and shame kind of polluters in real time, in real space, and kind of drill down to the actual facility. We can now track forest changing all over the world on a daily basis at 3-meter resolution, looking at forests all across the planet and see how they're changing, but maybe more importantly, why they're changing. Is it due to agricultural expansion in the Amazon? Is it due to palm oil in Indonesia? Is it due to subsistence agriculture in the Sahel? All of these things, we now know where forests are changing and also why. So not only do we think about climate solutions in time and in geography, we also have a last thing that science can tell us about climate solutions. is that we ought to get more from them than just saving carbon. Climate solutions are great at stopping greenhouse gas emissions. That's what they're for. But many of them also give us other big benefits, especially to human well-being. Why? Well, let me just illustrate this with an example. Burning fossil fuels is the single biggest source of greenhouse gas pollution, changing our climate. In addition, it's also a huge source of air pollution that we breathe, soot and smog. And that's soot and smog caused just by fossil fuels. The fossil fuel air pollution, respiratory burden, the health burden of air pollution from fossil fuels is estimated to kill about 8 to 9 million people every single year. Yeah, you heard that right. Fossil fuels today on this planet right now are killing 8 to 9 million people a year. That's like 2 Minnesotas, to put that in perspective. Every year. That's more than all the deaths from tobacco, guns, and war combined. So if we eliminate fossil fuels, we not only eliminate the single biggest contributor to climate change, we also save 9 million people a year. That's incredible. And it turns out when we analyze climate solutions here on the left, we find that many of them give other benefits to people as well. For example, improving food security, creating jobs, improving health, improving equality, educational opportunities, and so on. That there are so many good things about climate solutions that go beyond their impacts on greenhouse gases. They end up helping us build a better world. So as we think about what we need to do for climate action, this is what science tells us. Look for solutions that are grounded in evidence, not just fantasy or somebody pitching you or somebody shouting. Look for the data. Look for independent, verifiable, multiple sources of evidence from people who don't have a financial stake in the outcome. Look for solutions we can afford. In fact, you not only can afford them, you can't afford not to because they're going to make you money. We got to look for climate solutions that are fast, that kick in now, accumulating impact very quickly. We can target those climate solutions to the most impactful places. And then we can look for solutions that not only help us stop climate change, they also make the world a lot better at the same time. Fortunately, if we follow the science, we have a narrow window of opportunity to still address the worst aspects of climate change. In other words, we can still win this race for a better future, but we're only going to win if we follow the science. But science isn't going to be enough. That is one of the things we need, but we need 2 more. And I'll be quicker about these 2. As a scientist, you might find this funny, but I think science needs to guide us, but we need something else to inspire us. We need dreams. Why do I even say that? Why do I say we need dreams today? Because I think most of us are feeling right now that we're trapped in some kind of nightmare. A nightmare that's being created by our media and our politicians to divide us and for them to profit. We're just stuck in a nightmare of polarization and anxiety and fear. It's not real. It's not materially correct that we're living in a dangerous world, but it feels like we are. We're more anxious, we're more divided, but for no particular reason, except some very greedy people in media and politics are doing it to us on purpose for power and profit. It's that simple. We don't have to let that win. That's not the world we actually have to live in. It's optional because we're actually not that divided. As your survey before you were showing earlier today was showing for Canada, but it's also true in the United States. In most developed countries in the world, a very large majority of people believe and know that climate change is real. In the United States even, which you think it'd be 50-50, like we're told everything is in America, but it's not true. It's actually about 90% of Americans believe to some extent or another that climate change is in fact real. That's not where the disconnect actually is. The disconnect in the United States anyway, and I think it's true in Canada too, is that people do worry about climate change. They know it's real. They're kind of worried about it, but they're not seeing it as the single top issue facing them or the nation. In America, it's only 2% of Americans see the environment at all, let alone climate change, as a top issue facing them or the country. What are the issues then that face them or the country? Well, it turns out it's kind of kitchen table issues like jobs. That's always number one. or inflation and the cost of living, cost of groceries, the cost of energy, the cost of housing. Those are the top of the issues. Things like community issues around health and security and education. Those are top issues. Climate change, I don't have time to worry about that. But that's the beautiful thing. Climate solutions actually help us with all those other things. Climate solutions done right create jobs. Climate solutions done right save us money, reduce inflation, make us more secure, make our communities healthier, more prosperous. We thrive when we deploy climate solutions. So let's talk about them that way and meet the 98% of the world that doesn't list climate change as their personal top issue. So let's improve the conversation. Let's talk about solutions to climate change more than we talk about just the problems. Problems scare people, solutions inspire them. Let's meet people where they are. If only 2% of the people care about climate change as much as I do, I'm not going to win any big arguments by persuading 98% of the world that they're wrong. Maybe I should join them and meet them where they are and try to talk in their terms about things like jobs or inflation or communities or health or things that they actually care about. I want to respect that 98%, not dismiss them and say that they're wrong and they should think like I do. That's never a winning strategy. And finally, I think we need to show a better future is possible. It's very easy to tell people the world is going to hell and those people are to blame for it. That's what our politicians do. That's what our media is doing, especially in my country right now. But in fact, what really changes the world is a dream of a better future and the invitation to help build it. After all, like Martin Luther King didn't go around the world saying, I have a nightmare. That's what my president's doing these days. But Martin Luther King said, no, I have a dream. There's a dream of a better world. And in our bones, we all knew he was right. Now we're still building his dream. We're not done with that dream. And he died for his dream. But he was right, and it changed the world. And people are joining together to help build that. I think we need a similar dream of a better future when it comes to climate change and the environment as a whole, that this is a better world and that we're all better off with it and we can all join in building it together. Let's stop the division, let's stop the fear, and inspire people with dreams of a collective, better world. So if we need science and we need dreams, what's the last thing we need? I would argue we need heroes. And I don't mean the ones with capes. I don't mean the ones we see on TV or the ones we elect to high office or the ones that play sports or are rock stars or whatever. I mean ordinary folks, people in our communities, people in our own families who quietly and every day change the world. Just think about your own families. Think back a generation or two or three, and undoubtedly all of you can think of heroines and heroes who changed the world around them in incredible ways, quietly, effectively, and profoundly. It's what builds this world every single day. That's what we need. So I'm looking out for heroes because it's not game over when it comes to climate change. It's game on. This is the moment we were born for. This is the moment we stand up and we start to build a future we can be proud of. I think we try to inherit the legacy of all those generations before us that worked and sacrificed so much so that we could have an incredible set of opportunities today to build a better world. How dare we let them down? How dare we look our ancestors in the eye and say, yeah, we could have made the world better, but we were too busy. We were too lazy. We didn't care that much. After all the sacrifices these generations made so we could be here today, we owe it to them and everyone who comes after us to build a better future. That might be the unwritten commandment, that we should leave behind a world better than the we ourselves received. Let's see if we can do that. Let's build a better future we can be proud of that's guided by science, then inspired by dreams of a better future, and borrowing from David Bowie. Why not? We can all be heroes, even if just for one day. So with that, I just want to say thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to chat with you tonight. And I'll stop here and hope we can switch to some more conversation. And thank you very, very much again for what you all do and for the chance to be here with you tonight. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Foley. What a clear, compelling, and powerful call for action. I know David Bell would have been very proud to know that your lecture was what was representing his memory and legacy. So thank you. That was wonderful.